Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So that was a really interesting conversation with Evan Sambasivan, who ran in the Eglinton Lawrence area in Toronto. What do you call these? Brennan Bempong is my current
Yes.
guest. Brennan, what do you call you guys that are in your 20s? You're not millennials. What are you? The Zeds or something?
Gen Z.
Gen Z. Well, but Evan was a Gen Z candidate in the last election up against a long-term incumbent. Wasn't successful, but wants to run again. My current guest is Brennan Bempong, who was also a candidate in the last election up against an incumbent. He's also a Gen Z, and he was not successful, but he got a lot of notice and a lot of attention during the campaign. And he was running in Ward 10 in Mississauga. Brennan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me again, Brian. How are you today?
Very well. So tell me, what was the experience like?
The experience was very eye-opening. There's a lot of things, as you know, as a former candidate or as a partner to a candidate, there's a lot of things you don't really learn on through experience. You have to actually do it. With the campaign, there's a lot of mistakes that you never can really account for until you run a campaign, and then you see firsthand that you learn from it. So a lot of the things I learned was just pretty much that this is something that you need to have experience to do beforehand. And now that we have that experience, in 4 years, we're going to do a lot better and we're going to get the seat.
Why was it that you got involved? What was the motivation?
My motivation was that when I look at council, I didn't see a voice that understood the experiences that youth have, and beforehand, per people of color wasn't really representative on Mississauga Council. Now, after the results, we now have 3 councillors of ethnic backgrounds as well, but the problem still persists. We don't have anyone who's younger on council. I believe the youngest councillor is a 40 or 41. So again, we have the tail end of millennials, or the older side of millennials, no Gen Z. And as you know, Gen Z makes up a lot of the voting population now. So I got involved because I wanted to see younger voices on council, and I'll stay involved because we need to have younger voices on council.
So it's interesting. You take a look at the midterm elections in the United States, and I don't know if you follow them at all, but it seemed like in a bunch of different states, Gen Z younger voters came out in higher numbers than they ever had been expected to in the past, and really changed the dynamics in some of the votes. Were you able to, do you think, motivate young people to get out and vote?
So unfortunately, the reason why it was successful in the States is because, as you know, the States has a lot more media coverage on what's going on, especially at the federal level. As you know, in a municipal election, there's barely any media at all, any media coverage. And the people who do follow the media are already the informed voters. There's no way, besides what I did of going to every single house. And even when you go to every single house, not everyone opens the door every single time, of informing people of the importance of voting. So a strategy I have and something I learned is that we have to get to the people who don't vote, because the people who don't vote, as you saw with the midterm elections, are able to flip the balance of power. So hopefully people see that, and then hopefully in the next 4 years, with the federal election coming up, the provincial election coming up, and then finally another municipal, people are going to see the importance of voting, especially the younger demographics, because a lot of the things that are going to come down the pipeline, such as not being able to afford their own home, increasing property taxes, et cetera, and that's just at the city level, will start to impact their lives more.
Now, you've been reasonably involved in the community in the past. Given this experience, are you going to stay involved in the community, or are you sort of game over?
No, of course not. No, as you were saying earlier, I did really well in the election. Obviously, I didn't win, and I think I personally ran the campaign that was good enough to win an election. It was just whatever happened. So it's not just you win the election, you win or lose the election, and then you just hide depending on the result. I'm going to stay involved because the problems don't go away if you decide not to participate. So I'll still be around in the community. I actually have a lot of projects that are on the way out over the next year or so.
Now, you lost to an incumbent who's been there for quite a while, and someone who's, frankly, of the age that some people retire at. How did that play? Because, the reality is people over the age of 50, 55, 60 vote, in far greater amounts than the people under the age of 30.
Yeah, and I was not expecting people under 30 to finally see a candidate who was under 30 and still decide not to vote. So as you know, there's a 40-year age gap between the incumbent and I, and that played a big role. When I got to doors, some people were saying I was too young, and they weren't comfortable with that because they think at 25 you don't know anything about life. But if they knew even half of my life story, they wouldn't have said that. It was never anyone saying, "Oh, you have bad ideas or bad character." It was always, "You're just too young and you don't have experience." So then my retort back to them was always, "So how do you get experience if you don't have experience?" It's the same thing when you go to apply for a job and the job tells you, "Oh, you need to have 3 to 5 years of experience," but they want people fresh out of university. It's a contradiction. That's the contradiction I just experienced with this election. It was, we need someone with experience. How do you get experience if only one person has ever been the counselor in the job? So,
right. So there was someone of color that got elected next door to you, and
yeah.
they were successful because they, I think, to a large extent, got the endorsement of the retiring counselor.
Yes. Yes, I think there was more to it. I haven't really examined that in particular campaign, so I don't want to like speak more than I know.
Okay. So getting involved in the community and getting endorsements from other people seems to be one of the ways that you can get success in the election. Is that something that you're going to try to do in the next couple of years?
What I'm going to do is continue to focus on my platform. I don't want to win off of the name of someone else. I want it to be, they look at Brennan Bempong has done and they respect Brennan Bempong's work. It doesn't have to be the work someone else did or someone else coming and saying, "Oh, no, I didn't like this person." It has to be through the work that I'm doing and I will do, and the work that I have done in the past. I've now, as you said earlier, built a foundation for myself. And now it's just building on that and showing people that age isn't, and I think that's the main thing I'm fighting against is age. People want someone who's in their 40s for some reason, but it's the age, to show people that age is just a number and I'm way more mature than beyond my years.
Well, I think that's idealistic, but admirable, because I agree with you. I think you should get elected on your own merit, not that somebody else, particularly an outgoing person, designates you as the heir apparent. Because people should vote for themselves. They should decide for themselves. So let's talk about the policy. What do you think the issues are? You mentioned affordability. What are the big issues that you fought for and that you want to fight for over the course of the next couple of years?
Well, the thing is, affordability is another thing, and I'll continue to voice the concerns of the residents who come out to me and say, "You were right about this, and we need to get this done." Affordability, so affordable housing is one. Another one is more community engagement and what's going on. So too many times at the doors, there was a lot of confusion about what's being done in Ward 10 or in Mississauga or even Ontario. And I feel like by having these, as I was saying earlier in my last interview, the community engagement sessions where residents can come out and voice their concerns, and I can answer questions on the spot as the counselor or have staff there to answer questions as well. That's very important so that people feel like their taxes they have a direct say in what's going on with their taxes. If people don't have a direct say, they feel disengaged and they become, what's the word I want to use? They become disengaged and dejected from what's going on, as well as those are the two. And then, as to be specific to Ward 10 in particular, there's been issues with the developments on 9th Line. There's some confusion between residents on what's going to happen first. Are the houses going to go up first, or is the street going to be widened first? So just to provide more clarity for Ward 10 residents about what's going on there. Those are just three of many, many, many things.
So it was interesting when I was chatting with Evan earlier in the show, in Eglinton Lawrence in Toronto. He was saying that the affordability was an issue that played two different ways, because he's got a fairly well-to-do part of his ward where people didn't really want a lot more density and didn't want a lot more building, and enjoyed the fact that housing had gone up because they enjoyed the increase in their net worth. And then there was another area that was lower income housing, and their affordability was the biggest issue. And in fact, he had homelessness and food bank issues and things like that. Do you have that juxtaposition of two different points of view on the affordability issue in your area?
So in Ward 10, is the older demographic believes that, or I'm not going to speak for all and say all old people say this or all young people say this, but just from the experiences I've had, it tended to be people who are older with their with their sons and daughters already established. They were just, we don't want more housing, we just want to stay as it is. People who had younger children who were still at home, or people who had children who they couldn't get into the market, were more engaging and more interested in having more housing because they know it impacts them directly. But that's the thing. It's a lot of times people only look at their specific personal circumstances and then go from there. Ward 10, I would say, based off my experiences, I'd say is an 80-20 split. 80% of people wanted more housing, more affordable housing. They just wanted it done in a way that young people can actually get into the market and people can actually live around their parents and grandparents, versus the people whose children were already established. They just didn't care. They're like, you know what? My kids are good. I'm good. Leave it alone. So you can see that disparity between community members. And unfortunately, as you saw with the Mississauga election, only 20% of people, or 21.8% of residents went out to vote. You can kind of see based on the results which percentage of the people I'm talking about went out to vote.
Why do you think the turnout is so low? It's astonishingly low.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that go into it. So a lot of it, I would say the top three is number one, it's not promoted as much. As you know, with the provincial and especially the federal election, it's in your face. You turn on the TV, it's there. You go on YouTube, it's there. You go on Instagram, social media, it's there. Municipal election is nothing, especially when there's not a competitive mayoralty race. There's nothing at all. And then not unfortunate for her, but unfortunate for everyone running for council who's not an incumbent. There hasn't been a challenge for mayor literally since 2014. And in my lifetime, that was the only time there's ever been a competitive mayoral race. So because of that, no one cares about what's going on at the council level for the most part. As well, a lot of people don't know that there's even something that what the councillor does. They just see it as, the mayor is the mayor and then everyone else is just there. They don't understand that your councillor is actually your direct representative. And then number three is just voters' apathy, where so many people believe that nothing can change. So then because no one believes nothing can change, they think their vote's a waste of time. They don't go vote. They get the same people who have been in office the whole time who haven't changed anything, and they just think that not participating is how you reject the system or fight against the system, when that's exactly what the system wants you to do, not fight against it, and then it just continues to perpetuate itself.
You know, it's interesting. It seems like a lot of the things that the Ford government, the provincial government has been doing of late, whether it be, this strong mayor in Ottawa and Toronto, this ability that mayors can in Toronto and Ottawa outvote half of their council. That as long as they're voting on things that the provincial government agrees with in regards to more housing, etc., they've got almost veto powers. That they've instituted something like 57 ministerial zoning orders that have overridden local planning, zoning, official plan rules, etc. It's almost as if the provincial government doesn't think that local councillors are relevant and doing their job, and that they're too beholden to NIMBYism and have been stopping the development of needed housing, and so therefore they're trying to find a lot of different ways to sort of override the political power, the vote of the local councillors, giving the mayors more power, giving the minister more power. You're probably aware that the recent city plan for transit areas, the province actually edited it out and took out maximum height restrictions. So the province seems to be almost saying, comparable to maybe what you're saying people are saying, the local councillors are irrelevant. What do you think of that?
And it's very unfortunate because now with what's going on at the province, the people who are engaged and well aware are going to turn around and say to people who they talk to who are like, why should I vote? Because a lot of times, and I'll just use this story to illustrate my point before I answer your question. I had a couple of residents who literally said to me that they have one resident on the street who tells them who to vote for. If that person is now saying what you're saying about that, the local council is irrelevant, guess what? Even less people are going to go out to vote. And what's going on now with the Ford government and the current provincial government is bringing down voter turnout, because now it's saying that the people you send into office at the local level, I'm not saying are incompetent, but they're pretty much, their powers are being stripped, because now it's literally, if the Ford government tells one of the mayors to do this, they can just do it. They only need a couple people on council to agree with them, or a couple councillors to agree with them. And as you can see, they kind of click up a little bit and people have their click. So I'll use Toronto as an example. There's a lot of new and fresh, vibrant councillors in Toronto. And there's people who are endorsed by the current mayor of Toronto who are the councillor. So they're clearly going to agree with whatever he says. So now that group of councillors, let's say there's 25 members of council for or no, 26 for Toronto. So he only needs 1/3. So literally and essentially only 7 people on Toronto Council have power to do anything now. And that's not fair because that makes the remaining 15 or no, 15 more higher, 18 or so councillors irrelevant. That's a problem because then people are going to say, why don't we get rid of even more councillors and then we just shorten the council or lessen.
But if only 20% of the people are showing up, aren't they effectively saying that?
I think 20% of people are only showing up because they're not aware of the concerns that are going on, and they don't. And this is something that happened at the provincial election as well. A lot of low voter turnout there. Now people are seeing the crises with healthcare and education system. Now they're saying, "Oh wow, I should have voted." Same thing's going to happen at the city level, and hopefully that over the next 4 years it stays on people's minds because, as you know, essentially as an elected official, as long as you don't have a big crisis like literally the year of an election, you should be fine to coast.
The power of the incumbent is pretty powerful. There's no question.
Oh, yeah. I literally just experienced that.
We're chatting today with Brennan Bempong. He's a young gentleman, a Generation Z, I guess, that ran in the last election municipally. And we're talking about youth involvement in politics, getting the voter turnout up. We're talking about the challenge of running against an incumbent. And we're talking about what motivates people to get involved in politics. Fascinating conversation. We spoke earlier with Evan Sambasivan, who did the same thing and had similar experiences in Toronto. We're going to take a break for some final messages and come back with some concluding comments with Brennan Bempong in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guests tonight are Evan Sambasivan, who ran in Eglinton Lawrence in the Toronto municipal election, and Brennan Bempong, who is a candidate in the Mississauga election in Ward 10. And I really wanted to have these two guys, both from Gen Z, 20-year-olds that ran. Both of them ran against long-term incumbents. Both of them had fairly aggressive campaigns and really had focused on affordability and other issues that they thought that municipal governments weren't paying enough attention to. Both were unsuccessful, but both had good showings. And I really wanted to showcase both Brennan and Evan because, you know, we got some problems in our civic society. We have turnout in general that is down from 40 and 60%, a decade or two ago, both federally, provincially, as well as municipally, to 20%, 21% in the last municipal elections. And most of the statistics, I haven't seen it in the recent election, but most of the statistics say the vast majority of those people that do go out and vote are people my age and older. And people that are Brennan and Evan's age don't go out to vote. And if the voter turnout is only 20% in average, and it's over 50% for older people and less than 10%, and some people think less than 5% for younger people, that's a real problem. And it's a problem for democracy. It's a problem for municipal government. It's a problem for federal and provincial governments as well, though not as bad as municipal government. So, Brennan, what's the solution? How do we get people your age more interested in and involved in and voting in municipal elections?
I think one solution would be to have online voting like how Markham had, where you can vote from your phone, just because a lot of people spend a lot of days on their phone. So can you imagine if instead of having to drive to a voter station, and I know that's not an excuse, or having to get to a voter station, you could vote from your smartphone? I think that would help, and it wouldn't, and there'd be ways to safeguard that, because as you know, we do banking on our phone, so there's no excuse not to vote, because we live in a society where money is like the most important thing to us. So if we're able to protect our money on a smartphone, we should be able to protect a vote on a smartphone, as well as something I was told about by a lot of middle school kids and their parents was that they actually had voting taught to them. So they actually did mock elections for this past election. Happy to say I was able to win some of these schools. I wasn't able to win the actual election, but I did win the school elections, which is nice. So that teaches the importance to youth of voting. So that means in about 8 or 2 elections from now, not this election because they're middle school, but the next one, they'll be eligible for voting, and that shows them the importance of voting. So those are 2 things that I can think of off the top of my mind that would help with increasing voter engagement with youth in particular.
There was a referendum in California in the last midterm elections to reduce the voting age to 16 for exactly that reason, so that half the people would actually vote once in high school. What do you think about that?
I think that would be really great because then it will show them the importance of their vote and that you don't have to be a certain age or a certain status to vote, because a lot of people said to me that voting doesn't impact them until they're in their 30s. And I think that's just a really twisted mentality to have. Everything, I would even argue, obviously 14 is too young, but I think if you're able to drive, you should be able to vote. So anything from 16 and up, it's fair game. I would agree with that.
I think one of the other things is that people like you, and I know that you're different in this regard because I think you've been involved for a long time, but I think too many people like you don't get involved in the community early enough and stay involved. And I think that you got to get involved. You got to meet people. You got to establish a name for yourself. You got to get out there, and you got to do it repeatedly. And Evan and I talked about this. The vast majority of people don't win the first time out.
Yeah,
they've got to run a few times.
Yeah.
And so, what about you? Are you going to run again?
Oh, of course. I let people know right away. As soon as the election results came in, I was running again. I had some of my closest volunteers and friends over. Let them know I'm running again. We'll be back in 2026. Everyone keep the shirt, get ready. We're running in Ward 10 again. We'll be there in 2026.
Brennan Bempong, thank you so much for. People want to follow you in the interim. Do you have a website that they can go to? Or anything?
Yes. So is my first and last name, brennanbempong.com. Please check it out. I'll keep people up to date on what's going on. I had some highlights from my previous campaign as well as the things that I have going on. One of them is a clothing run that we'll be doing to help people in need. So anytime, just message me and then I can come and set up a day. I can pick up the clothes and then it will be donated to people in need.
I wanted to showcase both Brennan and Evan for you because I do think, even though they weren't successful, they're great examples of young men, young people that really wanted to make a difference in our community. And I am really worried about our democracy. Turnout in federal, provincial, and municipal elections are down, but particularly in municipal campaigns. And I did a show comparing Ontario versus BC. For some reason, BC turnout was up and councils changed over. And there were a couple of different things there. They had political parties, even though they weren't the same political parties as we have federally and provincially. But there were parties that ran and they turned over dramatically. Affordability, homelessness, housing were all similar issues in British Columbia. But they seemed, for some reason, the people seemed to worry about it, I guess, a little bit more. And they came out and voted, and they voted councilors out and mayors out and voted new people in because they want to change. For some reason, we voted for primarily incumbency in Ontario. And I worry that part of it is we're just not interested. Maybe it's that we don't have the same media attention. Maybe it's we don't have quality candidates, even though I think Brennan and Evan were very high quality candidates. Maybe it's the turnout is low. But if we want to have better societies, if we want to have better cities, we need to pay some attention and exercise our franchise. And so I wanted to encourage people like Brennan and Evan to stay involved and run again. That's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us, everybody. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos are available after the fact at briancrombie.com. Brennan, stay in touch, buddy.
Of course, my friend. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.